April 1945. World War II. With America and Britain just inches from victory, Winston Churchill surveys the battlefield. There's only one thing worse than fighting with allies, he said. Fighting without them. Winston Churchill, meet Donald Trump.
Our plan will put America first.
Our friends in the world, they're laughing at us.
Good evening. I'm Fareed Zakaria. After 4 years of the Trump presidency, what does the world make of America today? It's a question Americans might shy away from asking for fear of the answer. But we must ask, because we're living through a great transition. Americans are already voting for the next president, even in the midst of a pandemic, even as the president himself has been sick with COVID-19. We used to know exactly who we were, the planet's sole superpower, with the strongest alliances in the history of the world. If that is no longer true, who are we? If we needed our allies, would they stand beside us now? Or is America first, America alone? Our story begins in London, December of last year. Donald Trump arriving in Britain for a high-stakes NATO summit. He had left behind a Washington in turmoil. Impeachment hearings were just beginning.
Article 2 does not give him the power to do anything he wants.
What a disgrace to this committee.
It wasn't so long ago that we were the world's great superpower. The United States led the world in a titanic struggle against Soviet communism.
We meant to change a nation, and instead, we changed a world.
Reagan saw the Soviets as an evil empire, and America as a shining city on a hill.
After 200 years, 2 centuries, she still stands strong and true on the granite ridge, and her glow is held steady, no matter what storm.
When the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, it brought the Cold War down with it. Decades of nuclear fears began to fade as joyous Germans tore the wall apart with their bare hands. The final blow came in 1991. The flag of the Soviet Union was lowered for the final time.
An era comes to an end.
America was the last superpower left standing, and that was the world we got used to. America striding it like a colossus, making war, making peace. That lofty vision of America has changed radically.
From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first.
Get off my lawn. That really is Trump's message to the world. I'm more worried about America today than I have been in my whole lifetime.
We're going to do tremendous things for both China and for the United States.
Was playing right into China's hands.
This, from China's perspective, was thrilling. It was an opportunity.
We just officially terminated TPP.
As Trump backed out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership,
the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership.
The Chinese were moving forward with their own massive trade deal.
RCEP would count for 1/4 of global trade.
With some of America's allies.
When we withdraw from the global stage, they can advance their model of global leadership.
A revival of the old Silk Route. The aim is to link 66 countries.
China was also pushing one of the most ambitious diplomatic efforts since World War II.
An extraordinarily ambitious move by China.
A massive infrastructure plan
to loan countries money to build a network of infrastructure projects
called the Belt and Road Initiative.
This measure is America's answer to the challenge facing the free world today.
It's been compared to the Marshall Plan.
American help to supplement European self-help.
When America helped to rebuild post-war Europe.
American resources, machinery, food, necessities.
Winning over valuable allies.
The Italian Prime Minister becoming the first G7 leader to back Xi's Belt and Road Initiative.
China hopes to do the same thing around the world, building railways in Kenya, a major port in Pakistan, enormous projects in over 60 countries, costing an estimated $1 trillion. That's more than 7 times bigger than the Marshall Plan. Trump said the U.S. would leave the World Health Organization, a convenient scapegoat for his own catastrophic response to the virus. The UN agency that helped eradicate smallpox, which the U.S. once dominated, is now, more and more, China's domain.
The United States is the country that people come to for medical treatment if they can afford it.
Hospitals are facing a crisis.
How could this happen here?
Doctors and nurses now in short supply.
The world was shocked by America's response to the worst public health crisis in a century. One of the most shocking aspects of America's failure is that for decades the U.S. was the leader in the battle against global disease, from helping to found the World Health Organization to efforts to combat polio, smallpox, AIDS, and Ebola.
When America puts itself on the sidelines, the world becomes a really much more unstable, less secure, and less prosperous place.
Trump's decision to pull out of the WHO sparked an international uproar. At the UN, China appeared to chide America. Major countries said Xi Jinping should act like major countries, behave responsibly, and help the world. As the world races to find a vaccine, American companies are well positioned to be among the first to develop and deploy one. But even here, the Trump administration has spurned international cooperation. It has refused to join an international vaccine effort involving more than 170 nations.
We cannot defeat this pandemic as a divided world.
When the United States is AWOL, not only do we harm our own interests, but we are failing to bring the world together to act effectively to tackle this challenge. So now nobody is leading.
Long before Donald Trump ever talked America first, back when he was trying to make Atlantic City great again.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. In the last decade of the 20th century, America reigned supreme. The 1990s, the dawn of the internet revolution.
You got mail.
Not only it seemed like we were inventing the future, we were.
Apple could not churn out small computers fast enough to satisfy demand.
An explosion of innovation.
GPS.
An economy that roared.
America seemed to have the right formula.
This is the story that came before Donald Trump. How the world's sole superpower began the great squandering of its historic power and status. As we entered a new century, an American tragedy and a challenge for American power.
This has all the appearances of an extraordinarily well-coordinated and devastating terrorist attack.
In so many ways, 9/11 was the beginning of the 21st century. It was the beginning of a very different phase of American power.
At first, the U.S. stood strong, with friends by its side.
The world really rallied to us after 9/11. Even Russia and China and certainly Europeans.
America decided to go to war with Iraq, despite Allied protests, and to do it largely unilaterally.
Deliberately done, bypassed the United Nations, and on the basis of faulty intelligence.
You can't distinguish between Al-Qaeda and Saddam when you talk about the war on terror.
Days into Operation Iraqi Freedom,
we will in fact be greeted as liberators.
The incompetence of the Bush administration harmed America's reputation in myriad ways.
Abuse that included beatings.
So did accusations of war crimes.
Completely undermined our leadership role in the region.
The Iraq War raged on for years, costing hundreds of thousands of lives, and by some estimates, nearly $2 trillion. One man who watched closely as the Iraq fiasco weakened the U.S. was Vladimir Putin.
At the very time that the United States was beginning to go out into Iraq and Afghanistan, Vladimir Putin was beginning to try to reestablish in his mind a level of Russian power that hadn't existed in decades.
Can I look the man in the eye?
There had been no American Marshall Plan for Moscow. Then Washington attacked Russia's allies, Serbia, and liberated Kosovo. It expanded NATO to Russia's borders.
This was Putin's coming out. He decided it was time to push back on the United States.
The speech was very aggressive. The speech was a turning point. Putin was setting out his opposition to a unipolar world. Did we, in some sense, create Vladimir Putin, a kind of revanchist, angry Russia?
We didn't create Putin, but we created the conditions where Putin's message, his ultra-nationalist, the West is out to get us message, really resonated with the Russian public.
Then, as if the failed war in Iraq weren't enough to threaten American dominance,
economists say this is the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression.
An economic meltdown of catastrophic proportions.
2008, for many countries around the world, for many leaders around the world, was a kind of the emperor has no clothes.
The United States was not the economic dynamo the world had thought it was. The implosion of Lehman Brothers and other major banks shook the world's confidence in America's system.
Lehman brokers knew it was doomsday before dawn.
Overnight, trillions of dollars in value evaporated, not just for American businesses, but for foreign investors in financial markets across the globe.
It was really something rotten at the core of the American economic system.
U.S. unemployment went through the roof.
2008, nearly 1.2 million jobs have disappeared.
These two crises,
Back up right now!
Iraq and the financial meltdown, one military, one economic, fueled a sense that America's elites had blown it. It allowed for the rise of a populist demagogue.
We will make America wealthy again, strong again, proud.
In 1941, in Life magazine, at the time the dominant media platform in the United States, the famed editor Henry Luce wrote an editorial urging Americans to forsake their old isolationism and embrace their new global responsibilities. Throughout the 17th century and the 18th century and the 19th century, he wrote, this continent teemed with manifold projects and magnificent purposes. Above them all and weaving them all together into the most exciting flag of all the world and of all history was the triumphal purpose of freedom. It is in this spirit that all of us are called, each to his own measure of capacity, and each in the widest horizon of his vision, to create the first great American century. So was born a beautiful phrase and a grand concept. But from its earliest days, the American century was compromised, at first by the Soviet Union, presenting a different vision for the world. Washington built an alliance of democracies then, and fought the Cold War for 4 decades, and won.
The Soviet Union.
And then, as the 1990s began, it seemed that finally, Luce's vision for America had come true. The world was going Washington's way. Ancient civilizations like China and India had given up socialism and non-alignment and joined the open international economy and the global system. The American dream had become the global dream. Presiding above it all and pioneering the information revolution, America looked more powerful and respected than any country since the heights of the Roman Empire. It didn't last long. In part, this was because the international system never stands still and is now moving at warp speed. The countries that rose from poverty kept rising until, like China, they have become formidable competitors. With economic growth comes political and cultural confidence. These countries, from Brazil to Turkey to India, all act now with greater independence and strength than ever before. Partly, the nature of power itself has become more diffuse. What does it mean to be the most powerful country in the world when you cannot quell an insurgency in Iraq, nor counter the pervasive influence of social media or secret attacks in cyberspace. But all this taken into account, it must be said, Washington squandered its supremacy during its moment of ascension. The question for the country is, can it recover? Can it renovate, rebuild, and recommit to its world historical mission to create a better future? It is still not too late. I'm Fareed Zakaria. Thanks for watching.